Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Skinner for the African American for the Academic Society History and Recognition Committee. Our committee has been involved with ongoing interviews with African American men and women that was brought or were lured to the Tri-City area in 1943-45 for the Manhattan Project, formerly became known as the Hanford Atomic Energy Commission, and subsequent projects. Tonight we have with us, we have Jim Pruitt, a longtime resident, James Pruitt, a longtime resident of the Tri-City area, community activist, civil rights leader, human rights leader, youth counselor, and a number of other things. Jim also has a wealth of knowledge about, we'll say, the Tri-City area, Pasco, and Pasco in particular. So we're going to get started here, Jim, on this interview, and some of the basic questions we want to ask is in connection with the Tri-City area. Jim, when did you come to the Tri-City area?
I came to the Tri-City area in 1948. I got here June the 20th on my wife's birthday.
Mm-hmm. Well, James, did you come alone when you came to the Tri-Cities, or Pasco or Hanford?
That was the only, another guy, a friend of mine from Los Angeles, Bill Mathias.
Bill Mathias?
I came up on the bus.
Okay. Jim, let me ask another question. Approximately, how old were you when you came, we'll say, to this area?
I was 22 years old.
22 years old, okay. Jim, when you came to the Tri-Cities, was there a particular city that you lived in? Since now we have Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland, was there any one of those particular communities that you first?
I first lived in Richland in the barracks.
Okay.
Because when I got here, it was on Saturday, and I went to the Union Hall. I was labor, and I had a meeting with the business agent. So they dispatched me out for work Monday morning, and I went to work out in Richland.
Okay.
On the housing project.
Jim, what was the name of the housing project that you went to work? Can you remember? In Richland?
It was Richland. It was Nelliton Sound was the construction company that I worked for.
The contractor you worked for?
That I worked for that.
Okay.
It was the Nelliton Sounds project.
Okay.
In Richland.
Okay. On
the bypass highway.
Okay. Jim, let me back up a little bit. When you came to, we'll say, the Tri-Cities, say Pasco or Richland barracks, where did you come from when you came here?
I came from Los Angeles.
You came from Los Angeles?
Los Angeles, California.
Okay. Jim, you're native to what state?
Mississippi.
Mississippi, okay.
Mississippi.
Okay. Let me ask you this next question, Jim. How did you hear about Hanford? Or when did you hear about Hanford? What did you hear about Hanford that?
Well, a friend of mine, in fact, was my sister's boyfriend, Emmett Hoy, came up here. And he was working out there for Nelliton Sound for the project where I went to work. And I was working in Los Angeles. And he asked me if I wanted to make some money to come up to Richland, Washington. So I decided to come up here, and I stayed up here for 6 months. And the dust and the tumbleweeds were so bad, I went back to Los Angeles and stayed 3 months.
Okay.
And I came back, and I've been here ever since.
Okay. Jim, let's talk about the social environment in the Tri-City area, again, Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland, for the African American. At that time, 1948, what was the relationship between the African American and the, we'll say, the white community or majority community at that time?
Bad. Very prejudiced, very racist. And I was surprised when I came here to find a place that I had left a few years back from Mississippi, and came here and found the same thing that I found in Mississippi.
So we again, we're talking about, we just had blatant and overt racism and discrimination towards the African American community.
Yes.
And was it again? Was that exhibited as not only was it on the job? We'll say
it was on the job. It was in housing. It was in foods, restaurants. It was in the bars and the lounges, and wherever you went, there was a sign. If it wasn't a sign, it was no. We don't serve you in here. We don't serve you kind.
Okay.
And we couldn't eat. And I remember 1950, Hazel Scott sued the bus station.
When you say the bus station, was this the Greyhound bus station?
Greyhound bus station, because she was going to Richland to perform, and that was Adam Clayton Powell's wife. She was an entertainer.
All right.
She went to the bar to get some food. They were riding the Greyhound bus, she and her secretary. So they told her that they didn't serve black people in there. So she went back and sat down, and her secretary was white. And she goes to the bar, and they give her all setups and all, courtesy and everything. And she said, I don't want to eat. They said, why? I said, because you refused my boss. Mrs. Scott is my boss. And they went over and asked Mrs. Scott to eat, and they apologized to her for what they had done. And she says, no, why should I eat now? And I'm good for $50,000. So she sued the bus station. And from 1950 to this day, the bus station has not been anything progressive, nothing.
Okay. Jim, let me speak on, or say on the economics in terms of comparable pay at that time, we'll say for the white community, as we'll say doing the same work. We'll say that a black was doing the same work as the whites were doing. Was it the same pay involved, or was there lesser pay?
No, it was the same pay because it was union. The guys that worked in the union, it was same pay.
Okay, all right.
But they tried to see that the white guys got the better jobs, the higher paying jobs, like foremen, supervisors, and whatever,
Okay, Jim. Also on that note, we're speaking on we spoke about accommodation, some of the accommodation in restaurants, well, say as far as other public facilities. Let me ask you this question. In 1948, we had some groups that was formed in the black community. Could you give me any information on, we'll say, some groups that were formed? Was it the Human Relations Committee, or that was formed around those times?
The most that I can remember started in 1949, like the East Pasco Improvement Association. That was started in 1949. And out of that came the Tri-City Human Rights Commission. Mrs. Merricks and Mr. Merricks, and other people, Shirley Shepard and her husband, Mr. Shepard.
And also on that committee, did you say that was Heidelbar?
Yeah.
Heidelbar was on that.
George Heidelbar.
Okay, and we had some other members. We had Luzelle Johnson, was Iola James.
Iola James, Ray Henry, Joe Bush, Gilbert Owens. We had, I think, who was Mr. Minor, Charlie Minder. He was one of the guys on that.
Jim, you were also saying that that you went to work in, we'll say in '48, and you were working on a housing project, we'll say the bypass highway in Richland. And at that time, Jim, I know that there were African Americans working on the Hanford project. Could you tell me if there was a large number of African Americans, a small number of African Americans that was employed on that Department of Energy site or the Atomic Energy Commission, or were there many African Americans employed on that?
Yes, there was quite a few African Americans. I can't give you a round figure of what it was, but there was quite a few African Americans.
Do you can you recall in some of the job description, the titles of some of the African Americans that did work on the project? Were they laborers?
Labor, cement finisher, and painter, and a truck driver every now and then. The raggedest truck, and they wasn't it, you know, they hauled the honey wagon. That was the only thing that they could get. They couldn't get no higher than that.
Okay, now so the jobs were limited.
Limited.
And to menial task jobs, and also we'll say backbreaking jobs, you know, as far as laborers and stuff like that.
That's right.
And very little chance of advancement.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
There was no supervisors or foremans or none of that.
Okay.
On that job.
Okay.
I need to change that.
So Jim, we was talking about employment. And obviously we see that there was a disparity in employment, and also there was the African Americans were limited and being able to elevate themselves above just a certain level. Let me ask a question on the African American women. If they were employed, what type of employment most generally were the African American women?
Dishwashers, a few cooks, not many. Bid makers, and that kind of thing.
So it just, so it would be an African American women at that time, say, you know, again, 1948, was more domestic.
Housemaking, yeah, housekeeping, more or less.
Okay, Jim, let's go on to social entertainment for African Americans. Say 48, and let's work down, you know, work this way. What type of entertainment, as far as if it's nightclubs, eating establishments, that black businessmen, businesswomen in the community, what was the social life like at that time for blacks? And, you know,
well, they had one club to go to at one time, and that was down on Lewis Street. What is the name of the club? I was thinking of it, I forgot it already. But there was only one club at that time, and I think 1950 was when Mr. Moore, last of 49, the first of 50, he had a club down First and Lewis Street. The M&M was a place where you could go and eat. Was next door there.
When you say the M&M, I know that's, you know, initials for something. You know what the M&M stood for, as far as a restaurant or that eating establishment?
I don't know what that was the name of it. M&M. I don't know what to do. But I was trying to think of Mr. Moore's night spot he had there. God, I can't. Pruitt Palace is what it was, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that was the swinging place in town. Was the Pruitt Palace. But the other place across the street over there, that was where most of the people hung out at one time when I first came here in 1948. Was the only place that I know that that black people could go. I'll have to come back to that name because I can't think of it right now.
We got time. We can come back to it, Jim. Also, again, as far as black businesses, and we use the term entrepreneur, you know, here today, you know, right or wrongly, you know, but black businesses, were they limited at that time?
Oh, yes. Yes. Mrs. Aola James had a trailer court. That was her business, and Mr. and Mrs. Haney had a trailer court, and eventually they had a pool hall and stuff there. It was about, eventually it's the years come by, and they built a tavern over there, Norse's Tavern, and Ms. Aola James had a restaurant in there, and that was kind of entertainment.
Well, let me ask.
And that was the other black business.
Okay, what was that? You say Norse's Tavern and Mrs. James had a restaurant in there. Where was that located? Where was the location of that?
On Oregon, and was that? What was that street?
South of Middle Street. It was kind of south of Middle Street.
Yeah, it was.
Columbia or Hagerman, Marvin?
I think it was Hagerman.
It was Hagerman? Okay.
Yeah.
Mrs. James, you mentioned Mrs. James, and she had a trailer park business. Where was that located?
820 South Oregon, right in the middle of where Mr. Moore's junkyard is today. That's where two of my kids was born, right in the middle of the junkyard.
Okay, and I know that there were other businesses. As far as trailer park owners,
Aretha and Robert Dillon.
Okay.
Had a trailer court.
What was the names again?
Bob Dillon, Robert Dillon, and his wife, Mrs. Dillon.
Right. I thought Aretha. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Right. I want to make sure we get.
Try not to hide your mouth with that.
Okay.
Oh.
Also, Jim, on some of the black businesses. I know there was, it appeared to be a number of blacks that at that time, because housing was limited and substandard at most, but at that time, most of the living was in trailer parks for African Americans in Pasco, East Pasco, if you will, if you want to section and all. And there was a number of trailer courts, and I've heard a number of the names of the individuals. Besides Mrs. James and Dillon, I understand that Mr. Ely had a trailer park. Yeah. Ed Ely's father.
Ely.
Yeah, and I heard there was a Bud Walker. Had a little trailer park.
Yeah, he had a little trailer park there.
Okay. But
and eventually. There was Dewdrop Inn. I almost forgot that. J.D. Evans. At the Dewdrop Inn, that was a little hole in the wall. You had that. That was a black business.
Okay. Were there any other businesses that, as you can recall, and as we're going over this, black businessmen or women, as limited as was at that time?
No. That was it. And you couldn't live no place else in town but East Pasco, and that was the limit of black businesses there. And that was the Ms. James restaurant, Aola James, and J.D.'s place was it.
Okay.
And then years after that, I guess, 1955, Ed Jackson opened up the place, and it was Jack's Bar and Grill. Yeah, that was the really began the hangout of most black people was this restaurant, this bar.
Jim, let me go on and to speak in terms of the black community and the black churches or the blacks worship here. At that time, and I'm speaking again, when I say at the time, 48 and in earlier years, where were the places of worship for African American men and women and children in the area, or was it also very limited at that time?
Yeah, it was. You only had 2 churches at that time. It was Morning Star Baptist Church and the Church of God in Christ. Was the only 2 churches. And St. James was built in 1950. The Methodist Church, CME Church.
See.
And further expansion came New Hope Baptist Church now, and then Greater Faith.
Okay.
And I understand there's 7-day events, and then there was another Holiness Church, Reverend Vaughn. The 2 churches split, and there was 2 churches. One was the Holiness Church, and the other was Church of God in Christ, I guess the way they said it.
Okay. James, let me again ask the questions. We know the race relationship at the time was bad at worst. Jim, when did you see any changes on the horizon in the black community in the Tri-Cities? When did we start seeing some substantial changes or social change in the area?
After 1964.
And that's dealing with, we'll say 1964 Civil Rights Act and
Yes.
and the affirmative action.
Yes, that's right.
And that was some of the most significant changes was occurring at that time for the blacks and the black community.
Yes.
And
because we still not could go to Kennewick and any place, into the clubs at night and stuff like that.
Okay, Jim, tell me a little bit about Kennewick at that time, and far as blacks being able to freely move in the city of Kennewick. It sounded there was no free movement.
There was no freedom to move in Kennewick because there was only one grocery store in the Tri-Cities at that time stayed open after midnight. And it was Tri-City Foods. And if you go across the river to that store, the police was sitting out there somewhere, and if you went anywhere like you was going downtown, they would stop you and tell you was on the wrong side of the river. And you had to come back on this side.
Yeah, and Jim,
it go to the movies. But that was it. When you get out of the movies, you come on back across the river.
Okay. It was just that pervasive.
Yes, it was. No eating, no messing around in Kennewick, period.
Okay. Jim, was there, again, we're talking about that, we've seen that how things was, is blatant and pervasive. Did the African American men and women, when they did, we'll say, cohabitated or commingled with the white community, were they subjected to derogatory, we'll say, treatment of any kind, or were they treated with an even hand? Or?
No, they weren't treated with evil hand, but they always stood back. You was never their friend, and a lot of times they would, as long as you was on a job with the guys, they'd laugh and talk and treat you like you was, a part of them. But then when they get off and you meet him on the street in Kennewick with his wife or kids, he act like he didn't know you. He wouldn't speak to you. Sure, there was a lot of that, man. It's like I said, I didn't know that this place would be like that when I came here. That you couldn't walk in a restaurant and sit down and eat, and you could not do it in Kennewick.
Okay. Jim, let's talk about James a little bit more. James, I know that you've been involved in any number of activities, organization, as I said earlier, being a human rights, civil rights, community relations, working with the youth. Jim, tell us a little bit about some of yourself and some of the miles that you walked, and as far as some of your job descriptions over the years, being involved in the East Pasco Improvement Association in a number of the groups. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why that you were involved. And obviously you cared, so that's why you were involved.
Yes.
I can remember.
Okay.
Again, James, as I was saying, tell us a little bit about yourself. Again, because I know myself, as a kid, I know you was involved, we'll say, in youth baseball. You were involved in, we'll say, officiating as far as umpire. You were involved with the community relations between, we'll say, the city of Pasco Police and the community. Involved in, we'll say, affirmative action in a number of areas. Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself and when you first got involved.
Well, I tell you, when I first came to Tri-Cities, I went out on a job. I never heard my name called Jim until I came here to the state of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody called me James. Nobody in my family knew anything about it. My older brother was named Jimmy,
Mm-hmm.
and they called him Jim. But for James, I thought it was really odd, and I tell people what my name is, and they said, well, we call you Jim. I said, no, that's my brother's name. And they didn't understand it, I guess, and and I just got tired of trying to tell people that my name was James and not Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
So this one white lady told me that my mama was crazy for naming my brother Jimmy and naming me Jim. And I told her if she said that again, I would slap her. But I got involved because when I was a kid growing up in Mississippi, there was no place for us to work in city council, anything that would help us to make any kind of progress in life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to Los Angeles, I would go into the city council meetings when I got a chance. My brother-in-law would take me in, and I wanted to see what was going on. So I said, if I ever got to a place where I could work and do something, I would.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to Pasco, it was a small town. So I began to see what was going on, and after I seen all the racism here, and then that's what I began to do. I began to look out and see what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I put forth an effort to do something about this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And marching and demonstrations that we put on and stuff like that, I was a leader in that, in the civil rights thing.
Okay.
I began the Scouts, I believe it was in 1954.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the first black Boy Scout master in the Tri-City area to belong to the Blue Mountain Council.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with the young people. Out of the 22 kids I had, I lost 2 of them. And the rest of them has progressed very good in life.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me feel very good about that. And working with the youth council, and doing something to try to get them to understand where we had to go,
Mm-hmm.
because the place was, it was bad. It was segregated.
Mm-hmm.
The kids couldn't go in the swimming pool. We couldn't go to Memorial's swimming pool and go in. They fill up a swimming pool out at the Navy base out there to keep black folks from swimming in it. And those were the things that I seen that I worked on.
Okay.
And
So, Jim, you had mentioned in 1948 that in the African American community there was a group that was formed to promote social change. What was the name of that organization? In 1948, was it the? It wasn't the East Pasco Improvement Association, was it? Or what was it?
the East Pasco Improvement Association was 1949.
It was 1949.
1949 was when that began.
Okay.
And I just gave you some of the names of that: Napoleon Wilson, Shirley Shepard, Mr. Shepard, Luzelle Johnson, Ray Henry, Mrs. James, Mrs. Barton, Gilbert Owens. There was many people that seen that this needed to take place. And these were the organizers.
Okay.
Mrs. Merrick's and her husband organized the Tri-City Commission.
Human Relations Committee.
Yeah.
Okay. And those two organizations, Jim, they were focusing on when you say improvement, it is basically improving social condition and economic conditions in the African American community. What were some of the projects or efforts that that initially started that? Was it substandard housing, no housing, streets, water? What
substandard housing, streets, the street lights, the dusty streets that we were having, and these things for better homes and for better jobs. And they worked to get me the job for the city in 1960. I'm the first black man to work for the city of Pasco.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jim. I know that there was again, like I say, there's a number of organizations that you've been involved with on the civil rights area, the human rights area. Jim, if I can recall, that you were also the city of Pasco, and I believe it was on police community relations.
Police community relations department.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
How did you get tied into that? We'll say human relations. We'll say program.
Well, since I was working in the black movement, and I led quite a few demonstrations and marches on the streets here in Pasco and in Kennewick, and also Richland, they decided to grease the squeaking wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I got the job.
Okay.
I put in the application for it and everything, but there was over 200 applications that people had doctor's degrees, that they didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in 1969, if you remember 68, they had a little ride over in Kurtzman Park.
Mm-hmm.
In 1969, they had the ride in front of the courthouse.
Okay.
In the park there.
Mm-hmm.
And there was over 400 kids was out in that park. And the police went down and they had 4 warrants. And they went down and got the 4 young men that they was after for drugs.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't they, it was Lieutenant Button, I'm gonna just call his name out. He hit a couple of girls with his nightstick and he drew the crowd. And the kids came back the next day with rocks, rifles, shotguns. There was over 400 people out in that park, young people.
Mm-hmm.
There was only 3 white people in that park. Lee Bresh.
Was a police officer?
Yeah, Sergeant Lee Bresh. And Sam Hunt was one of the teachers. And Mr. He run Columbia Light Products down there on 8th Street. I can't call his name right now, but anyway, I'll get back to that. But anyway, those kids was out there fixing to get destroyed because they come to destroy the police department. They turn over police cars and stuff up there in the street, burn down their trees in front of the courthouse. And they had Reverend Allen. Reverend Allen, he didn't come. But Reverend Vaughns, Wayne Jackson, Nat Jackson, and myself. And everybody spoke to those young people. And I got on the wishing well. And I cried like a baby. Because I seen what was going to happen. If those kids had to pull up them guns out there and start shooting at them police, they were going to destroy them. And these was all white kids. Mm-hmm. And I got on the wishing well, and I promised them if they would just think about it, because they were going to get destroyed and go back home, And think about it, I said, as long as there's blood in this body, I will never let this happen again in this town. I promised them that. And the kids dispersed. And I went down and put in my application after that. They started, sending out applications. And I went in and put in my application. And that's how I got the job.
Okay. Jim, you had also mentioned that you organized a number of marches in the Tri-City area of Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland. Can you tell us something about the first march that you were involved in this area here and the reason why you were marching?
Yes. For the same reason we've been fighting all the time, for better housing, for better streets, for better lights, for better jobs, for a better school. Whittier School over there had rats and roaches, and they had no place to put their food. The food was on the floor out there with roaches and everything else crawling through it. And the white people had moved all their kids out of the Whittier. There's 4 white kids going to Whittier School over there. Those were the things we demonstrated. We had no black policemen. We had no black lawyers in this town. We had nothing. And why not? Why not recruit some of these people? Because they were unwelcome. And that's why we did that. Mosetta Orange was one of the young people that I worked with very, very rapidly. And East Side Market was right in the black community. They wouldn't hire a black person. Gene and Gerald would not hire a black person in that store. Before they would hire a black person in that store, they sold the store. And we got Roland Andrews the job there. And then Reverend Wilkins, he went to work there as a clerk. Those were the kind of things that we done. We had Slips Firestone down there. In the black community, wouldn't hire no black people. And finally, when his place went up for something down there, then we hired a black man. I guess he retired a couple of years ago.
Okay. I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name here. I believe that was working at Slips Firestone, but I can't.
I can't. He's Wild Bill, Mr. Wild Bill. Everybody know his nephew. But I worked the first 18-wheeler driver was Henderson.
You see, it was Henderson?
Yes. Not Clyde, but
it was it Gilbert? Gibson?
Yeah, Gibson Henderson.
Gibson Henderson?
Gibson Henderson. I got him a job out at the Chevron station. Way out there driving 18-wheeler.
Okay.
Avery Johnson. Not Avery. What is it? Mr. Tony, not Tony, but the other Avery.
There's Jim Avery. We call him Jip. There's a Henry. There's a Larry.
I guess it was Tony Avery. Tony Avery
and he had a brother who was Danny.
No, Tony.
Okay.
Tony was the one. I got a job for PI. I talked to PI down there about them driving. I got him a job down there, and it's another young man. He killed his wife up in Spokane. She was secretary when I was there with the police department. What was that boy's name? God, it's right on the end of my tongue, and I can't call him. But he was driving, and they were driving 18-wheelers. Those were the kind of things that I was working for, to get these positions. And that's why we had the demonstrations. And in Kennewick, we demonstrated over there because nobody could go to Kennewick. And the first black man that had a house over there in 1961, he left and came over to Mr. Walker's. It was Mr. Walker's daughter's husband. Mr. Walker's daughter had the house over there. And she and her husband came over to visit him in Pasco. When they got back, the house was burned down.
This is in 1961?
1961 in Kennewick.
Okay.
Yes, this was why we were demonstrating. Herb Jones and his family moved to Kennewick in 1965. And they cut the tires on his car, broke the glasses out of a brand new Ford he just had bought. And these was the things that we were marching for. Why not? Why not live in Kennewick, anywhere else you wanted? We were citizens.
And this is America, you know.
This is America. And I look at it today, and people are saying we are together. For over 400 years, we haven't been together. And now they want to say we are together, but we are not yet there.
James, and obviously, the story that you told about being called James, which is your given name, opposed to Jim. Is there a story behind that right there? You know, is there, we'll say in the past that the white community referred to African American men outside the given name, Jimmy, if the name was James, and that was a negative connotation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and boy. They wanted to call you boy. Say boy. You know, I didn't allow nobody to call me boy. Because my name is James. And I feel like this, like I tell guys, I said, whoever you meet and they give you their name, they tell you what my name is, that's what they feel comfortable with you calling. And that's what I tried to do. But yeah, they'd call you Bob, for Robert. If your name was Robert, they wouldn't call you by your full name.
Your given name.
No, your given name. They had to put something else to it.
So this was out of, obviously this was
lazy.
Is it lazy? Out of, we'll say respect, not having respect for the African American.
That's right. Didn't have no respect for it at all. None.
Okay.
None. And I tell you what, believe it or not, I hit a guy in the mouth for calling me a nigger. Right here in Pasco, I hit him just like God had forgot it. And I wouldn't have never thought that would have happened.
Well,
and they would do that as long as they felt like they could get away with it. And they'd call you boy as long as they felt like they could get away with it.
Oh, so in other words, you're saying as long as you allowed it to occur, they would continue to occur.
They would play with you out in Hanford out there. The man would come, the foreman sometime would come up and kick you with his knee. And I've seen guys laugh, and walk on off from, but don't take your feet off the ground towards me. Never. But they do that, and then finally, if you let them keep bumping you with your knee, then pretty soon they start. I've seen them kick them. Oh yes.
Okay, so there was just a general disregard for African American if you allowed it to happen.
Yes.
If you allowed it. Okay. Jim, let us revisit, some of the, again, some of the first that you had mentioned that were some of the first of blacks in the Tri-City areas, whether it was jobs, whether it was, we'll say, patronizing, we'll say, white, we'll say, businesses, nightclubs, and not have that Jim Crow stigmatism. Can you share with us some of the first things that that you recognize as far as accomplishments or position that blacks never had held before, but now is holding? We'll say stores that blacks formerly couldn't go in, but now we could go in. Could you give me some of the first on that, Jim?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about a little while ago. That. When black people couldn't go into the restaurants, job situations, they wasn't working in the stores, the clothing stores or food stores or none of those places. And I think, it was about it was in the early 60s, before we really seen any changes. To where people, and like I said, one of the things, East Pasco was a big grocery store there, what made them guys rich. and they wouldn't hire a black person in the black community.
Okay, you know, and you mentioned the name of that store was Gene and Jewel. James, as I can recall, the Gene and the Jules, their last name were Wright. Was it, you know, if I'm not mistaken, was Wright?
Gene Wright and Jewel, I don't know what Jewel's last name was.
Was it Myers?
Might have been Myers.
They also had, not only, we'll say the Gene and Jules over in East Pasco, but they also had a Gene and Jules on the west side of town.
They sold Gene and Jules over there and built this one over here because they did not want to hire no black person.
Okay.
They wouldn't hire no black person.
Okay. And on that relocation of the Gene and Jules from East Pasco to West Pasco, where was it the Gene and Jules store that they built to avoid hiring blacks? Where was that located? Was that located on Court and Chase?
That was on Court.
Which is the Chase. You know, it's 20th now, but you know, it used to be Chase.
Chase.
Used to be Chase.
Yes.
Was it located around that area?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Jim, you also said in the city of Pasco that you were the first black that was employed by the city of Pasco.
Yes.
And what year was that?
1960.
1960.
I was employed through East Pasco Improvement Association. They fought the city. Shirley Shepard and Mrs. Halbar, Mr. Halbar, Mrs. Merricks, and all of those people. Kenny Moore, he was a councilman at that time, city councilman. And they called him the East Pasco Nigger Council.
Tell us some more. Who was the mayor at that time? Can you recall?
Let's see, who was the mayor? Ted, what was old Ted's name? Oh, God. I can't call his last name, but Ted was the mayor there in 1960. And he was the mayor. He was a real racist, real prejudice.
Jim, you also said that, you know, you were the first black Boy Scout troop leader.
Yes.
In the Tri-City area, Pasco or whatever. And you mentioned you had 22 scouts at that time. And what else were you first in, Jim, around in the Tri-Cities?
I was the first black man to run a service station, 76 Union Station down on 4th Avenue at the Dodge Place. I worked for Mr. Don Hammer. He went in, he was talking to his buddy in there, and he said, I got a man here needs a job, because my son was going to be born in February, and we couldn't work on the dam because there was too much ice, and I need the job. And he was from Louisiana, and he said, man, black guys work at the station there all the time. He said, I'll give you a job. He gave me a job working for him, and I would run the station at night. And there was people come to the station to get gas, and I'd go out to serve them, and they'd ask me for Mr. Hammer or Bob. They was out to lunch, or if they was going someplace. I said, well, they're not in right now. Can I help you? No. So the one night I was there, this lady came in, and I went out to fill her tank because I know she come by and get the food, and she asked me where was the boss. I said, he's gone home. He might have not, he wasn't going home that night, but he went and got him a sandwich, and he said he was going to leave me, he's going home. So I told him, I said, well, he may be going home, I don't know. Well, where's Robert? I said, you know, Robert's going home. I'm the only one here. I said, can I help you? No. So about that time, he went back up in the driveway. He got out and he says, what's wrong? I said, I don't know, the lady want to see you. So he goes over to her and he said, "Ma'am, can I help you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." "Yes, sir." She said, "Fill her up." He said, "James work here." Said, "Why?" He said, "Why couldn't you fill a car up with gas?" I said, "I asked her what does she want, and she asked for you. She didn't tell me she wanted no gas." And he said, "Why didn't you tell him?" I didn't want him putting gas in my car. He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, ma'am. He works here. And if he can't put gas in your car, then we don't need your trade."
So this female customer, because you were an African American, refused to do business with you
Yes, sir.
at a station that she does business with
Yes.
on a day-to-day basis.
Yes. Yes. She would not let me fill that car up that day. So he said, "Fill it. If you want, if he can't fill it up, I won't fill it up." So she said, "Fill it up." And he went on the inside. So she asked me if I knew where she could get 6 black chickens. And I said, "No, I don't." And I called Don and asked him. I said, "Don," I said, "the lady asked me if you knew where she could get 6 black chickens." And he's very squirrely anyway. He says, "Well, let me see. I don't know." He said, "But if there's any around, I can sure get them for you." He said, Why you want 6 black chickens?" She said, "I want them for pallbearers." She said, "My cock is dead." Those were the kind of things that that you get from them kind of people. And a lot of people come in and didn't want me to serve them. Yes.
And that's interesting, and I know it was true, Jim. But it's really pathetic that people were that shallow and that small, to not, we'll say, want to give individuals the same, we'll say extension of the hand that they would extend to other people. And it's really sad, that we have individuals in this world this way that feel that they're out here by themselves. And Jim, is there any other first?
Yes, when I was working for the city department, Buck Whistler was the supervisor there. And he was so racist. He'd tell me one thing, the foreman, Herb Carr was the foreman. He would give me a job to do, and Buck would come along after he leave and tell me something else to do, then go tell him that I wasn't doing what he told me to do, I was doing this. Buck Whistler was the supervisor. He didn't want me on the job.
So he was doing everything he could to undermine you and get you run off.
Until the last minute. He did it too many times. And he did that one day, and Herb come to the shop. I was threading some pipe. I was cutting some water joints and threading them. And he says, "Why weren't you threading them joints?" I said, "Buck told me to go out there and cut weeds and leave that alone." He said, "Buck said you wasn't doing what I told you to do." I said, "I was there threading pipe, man. There's 2-foot pipes. I had to thread them on each end." I said, "I was cutting pipe and threading them." He told me to go out there in the yard and cut them weeds out. He said he did. I said, "Yeah, that's what he done." So Buck came down, and I was so mad I couldn't wait. When he come down, I run at him. I was going to kick him out of one side and down the other.
So
he took off.
So again, it seems to me that you were being set up.
Yes, but I had got tired of that.
But then being set up, as far as African American men or women, it didn't seem like it was.
The thing was, John, we were trying to get unionized. He did not want to union the city employees. So he laid 3 of us off in September in 1961. There's 2 white boys and myself, Robert Noonan, because we was organizing a union, even though we did get it. Oh yes, we got it.
So Jim, you were trying to tell me you were a union organizer also?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, John, that I had tried, because I always never had a chance when I was growing up. And I always wanted to do something to try to help young people. I'm still doing the same thing today. I live in Alaska, but I'm still doing it.
Jim, let me also ask you about, you were also employed for the city of Pasco, and you were in the capacity of a community relations officer between the Pasco Police Department.
As a liaison.
A liaison, okay, and the African American community. Could you tell me some parts of that job description? You've already shared with us on some, as far as the what they call riots, we'll say, or demonstration, Kirschman's Park, and also Volunteer Park across from the Franklin County Courthouse. And then you were there mediating, we'll say, that crowd. It sounds to me that, that you was effective in your mediation, to quell the crowd, and you promised that as far as your involvement. Tell us about that involvement with that liaison position.
When I went to the police department, I went there with this in mind, to bring about a better relationship between the police department and the people in the city of Pasco. Not only in the African community, but also in the white community. And that was my goal. And I had ball games set up between the people and the police department, softball teams, and we also had a pig in the freaks game with the police, but to bring about the better relationship with the police department. The police had been pretty rough on black people in Pasco. And that was one of the things. I had an office set up there in the Matrix building. And when people would be involved with the police or any way, form, they'd come to me and I would investigate it. Police would be harassing people, certain people, and oh yeah, that was quite a bit. And those were my things, was to investigate it and find out and see what was happening and what was going on. And I also got the guns out of the police department. Out of the cars that were sitting up in they had them in the trunk, because that's intimidation. Intimidation to people when they see and knowing that you got something to kill them with.